showing up, God. Yeah, there we go. In the handouts that I offered, I'm going through the Sunday Gospels of Lent, and I know that may seem like backtracking a little bit at this point, but I'd like to consider all of them together in this retreat and draw some images out of all of them that we may ponder along the way and come to grips with. So I would like to go back to the first Sunday of Lent and read the full text of the Gospel, which is from Luke chapter 4, 1 to 13. Filled with the Holy Spirit, Jesus returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the desert for 40 days to be tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when they were over, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live on bread alone." Then he took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a single instant. The devil said to him, "I shall give you all this power and glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I may give it to whomever I wish. All this will be yours if you worship me." Jesus said to him in reply, "It is written, you shall not worship the Lord your God, or you shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve." Then he led him to Jerusalem, made him stand on the parapet of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you and guard you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him in reply, "It also says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him for a time. My dear sisters, once again in this Lenten season, we are invited into a desert. Are my batteries not on? Are they? Is it okay? Got it? So we are invited once again to enter the desert. The desert is continuing. And we also are very aware that the desert is a lifelong process. Guess what? It doesn't go away. There are days that we stumble. There are days in which we are full of dread. There are days in which something overpowers us, and we can't find our way through a particular issue. The desert, though, is an interesting image after Jesus was baptized, for he compelled himself by the Spirit to go into the desert. And what he encountered there in his great hunger, in the barrenness of the physical place, were the temptations that he faced from the devil himself. Being incredibly vulnerable and hungry, and apart from the community itself, his followers, being being separated from his daily routine, being separated from everything that he had known up to that point. He found himself face to face with things that could easily have overpowered him. Those things certainly would have overpowered us. And yet, because of who he was in that great mystery of being the Son of God, he overcame the temptations that were near him. Years ago, when I was in college, I had an opportunity to go to Israel during a summer. And some of you may have been there, and I was going into my senior year in college. There were 40 people from the University of, Loyola University in Chicago. It was an incredible experience. I will never forget it, because the gospel just seemed to come alive. So one afternoon, we got on this bus and we went into this desert. I'd never seen a desert like that. It was just pure rock and sand and sun and heat. It was over 120 degrees, and there we were. Our leader took us to the edge of this mountain where there was this steep cliff. And over at the other side of the mountain, beyond the cliff, beyond the valley, there was another hill or mountain. And running down the other side of that mountain was this green patch, this unbelievable green growth coming down the side of the mountain, because there was a stream on the other side. All along the path of the stream was this incredible green growth. These plants and shrubs out there in the middle of the heat and the center of the desert, and overwhelmed, I would have thought, by this great, enormous sun. But there it was, along the path of that stream was actually great green and refreshment. It was so striking to me that so we were told that actually the desert place is very fertile. And if it just is given some opportunity to grow, it will. It strikes me that that is an image for our whole Lenten journey, that the desert we are invited to go into is also a place of growth. It is a place of surrender. It is a place that if the conditions are right, all kinds of new things are going to happen. That image really is not about an external desert, I would think. It's more about an internal one. Now, we are very aware that there are many different kinds of deserts. We've heard of food deserts in neighborhoods among the poor where there is no fresh food and fresh vegetables, where there is no opportunity for people to really get a deal on a meal. There are all kinds of deserts, medical deserts. For those of you who were in healthcare your whole life, you understand that there are places in the country where medical access just does not happen. It can't happen because of a desert that is a medical desert itself, a healthcare desert. There are lots of deserts and lots of experiences of those kinds of deserts. But I'm very aware that there is nothing so turbulent or destructive as the inner desert, as the place in our hearts that strive for meaning and growth and change and honesty and hope and goodness and compassion. There is no other desert outside of ourselves that has so much turmoil than our own hearts and lives. So in this Lenten season, what I'm inviting you into is to look again at the places in your heart where you most need God, in which the desert place seems to be overwhelming for you. And that is in your loss of memory. Perhaps that is in your body pain. Perhaps that is within the disappointments that you have carried all along in your religious life. Perhaps those are the pains and the anguish that you hold on to from childhood. Perhaps those are the things that, the destructive things that you see happening in our world today that you just don't know what to do with. It is the anguish of the human heart that, it seems to me, bears the mystery of the refreshment that the external desert I saw years ago can happen. We are invited into the mystery of God's presence in our lives. We are invited into the ways in which our Lord Jesus Christ is opening up a door for us to bring with us everything so that something new may happen. As I age and as I look back in my own life, I'm now back at the University of Notre Dame. I grew up very near there, and it's been interesting for me to come back to the place of my birth, but also to come back to the place where I was formed in the community, where I was ordained, where all of those things from the past happened. I've basically been away for those 40 years in the West, Colorado, Oregon, California. It's interesting for me to step back into the place where I was formed in the community, because what I see there sometimes in my own heart are all the things that happened in the past that I wish wouldn't have happened, that I may now see differently as a regret, as a sin, as an obstacle to my life now. Being back in that physical land where I went through college and graduate school and formation now evokes in me all of the ways in which forgiveness has to happen, first within me, where revisioning of what I did and what my friendships were like and the choices and decisions that I made, all of those things seem to me to be part of the desert experience now as an adult. I mean, my goodness, I've been ordained 42 years, but I never really looked at those things because the land that I was standing on was different. Now that I'm back in that place, I see the ways in which God longs to refresh me still from the past. The that stream of refreshment in the desert is not a one-time deal. I really believe that over and over again, we are called to still enter the desert because there's still more for God's work to be done in us. If we take our prayers seriously, there's more work of God's grace that needs to happen within us. If we take our lives in the community seriously, then there's still more work that God has for us that needs to be done in us if we are open to the possibility. So we may ask ourselves here today at this time, what work in your heart does God still need to do? So, whom do you need to forgive? Are there events and circumstances in your own life that still need to be brought to the Father's love so that it may be refreshed, that something new may happen? What is it in you still, if you enter into this gospel text of the desert, and especially the temptations, what still tempts you? How do you need Jesus Christ in your life to still evolve as religious, as women, as caretakers of the gospel, as people of hope, as people that reflect to the world God's goodness and grace? As we look at this image of the desert, I couldn't help but think, I wonder what Mary was doing at that time. I wonder what the feminine image of the gospel in Mary, I wonder what she was doing at that time while Jesus was in the desert. Sometimes I could think that she was saying something like, oh my God, that boy of mine, he gets himself into the darndest situations. But I also, in my own religious community, we are dedicated to the priest of the Sacred Heart, but overall, the patroness of our community is Our Lady of Sorrows. And, you know, when I reflect on this gift of the desert in the Lenten season, I see Mary, Our Lady of Sorrows, somehow standing or sitting in some shade and being at home, waiting silently for her son to return. I know that she must have experienced or seen within her own life what he was going through and the temptations that that could easily have overwhelmed him. So I want to say that she was there with him, though not in the desert. She was there with him, going through what he was going through, but being the caretaker of her home with Joseph. She waited silently by his whole life. I have to believe that she also stood silently along the periphery of that desert. I believe, too, that Mary also stands with us when our hearts are broken, when grief overwhelms us, when change frightens us, when we don't know what to do with world events right now. She is there also with us and offering us an incredibly beautiful heart that walks with us. In the image of Jesus in the desert that begins our 40-day experience of Lent, there are also caretakers of him, Mary, the other disciples, that I wonder if we could pray with some of those people to also help us get through it. So in this Lenten season, who might you pray with to understand more deeply your own temptation, your own sorrow, your own mystery of the ways in which God is inviting you into life? Who is it that you might pray with? Is there a follower of Jesus that you are attuned to who might give you a new image of what you are going through in this life? So, is there someone that can help you, if it's not Jesus alone, that can show you the path through the desert where there is a stream of life? Because what we are doing in this Lenten season is trying to renew the gift of our baptismal lives. What we are trying to do is to come to grips with again the fact that we are that beloved through the gift of our baptismal lives, that we are part of the plan of God's unbelievable mystery, that we are part of the redeeming love of God in the church today. Don't worry about where we're going. You know where we're going. Don't worry about us not getting there. We are. Don't worry about the things that have happened or that still happen in the world that overwhelms and discourages you. In the Lenten season, you know exactly where you're going. We're going to the very heart of Jesus Christ, and after our last breath, we know very well, too, about where we're going. The Lenten season is also about learning how to see things differently. Years ago, when I was in college too, I worked at the place that I work now. I was an orderly there. And of course, in those days, it was called an orderly. Now it's called an aide, right? And I was a kid. I don't know, how old was I? 19 or 20 or whatever. And I remember being initiated into this place of helping priests, function, giving guys showers and helping them into bed and feeding them and all of these things that I had to do. Now, I was that was totally new to me. I had no training at all. They just kind of threw me in there and off I went. It's interesting to watch how my perceptions have changed about some of those guys. I remember walking into this room where a man, this priest, was kind of curled up in bed. He said very few words. But I remember like it was yesterday that looking around his room, there was absolutely nothing in it that belonged to him. Nothing. There was no picture. There was no family image. There was no, there were no books. There was nothing. There was nothing in there but the essentials of his life at that moment. And I remember as a kid, I was just really overwhelmed by that. I thought, how sad it was that he had all those connections to his ministry. He had been a professor, to his students, to all of that stuff was gone. I thought it was a desert place in which he had lost himself. Now, the interesting thing is that a few years ago, I started praying with that again. It took me over 40 years to figure out that was intentional for him. It took me over 40 years to realize that's the way he wanted it, because he was preparing himself for the end. My goodness, how things can change, how perceptions of our lives and relationships can change. It took me over 40 years to finally understand that's the way he wanted it. And that's the way God wanted it in him, so that in the last moment of life, he could give over his last breath to the Father's love and end that desert experience finally. That's the way he wanted it. And so that all of his earthly attachments were already gone. It's interesting for us in our lives to go back to some of the experiences that we've had in ministry and in healthcare and education and social work and all the ways in which you have served the church, to go back and re-image about what you thought was a desert place in your life. Maybe it was the loss of a parent or a friend or a sibling. Maybe it was something that you desperately wanted to hold on to but couldn't. And you found yourself in a desert not just for one moment, but for years and years and years of your life. Maybe this Lent is an opportunity for you to go back to some of those key experiences in your life and pray with them again, to understand more profoundly God's work and activity that leads you to today. In the desert place, what is it that you need to let go of so that you can better understand the mystery of Jesus Christ in your life? In the desert places of every place that you have ever been, in those experiences, what are the temptations that kept you thinking in one direction, when now, as you pray with them, might very well look different? Might it be a family? Might it be a ministry position that you had? Might it be something that needs to change in your heart so that you can more fully let go of things that you don't need? The anger, the resentment, the disappointment, the failures, and all of the things that keep you from today trusting in the power of God's love for you. The desert place is complicated, but the desert place can also be a source of refreshment, not just one time in your life, but many times over. So I invite you today or this morning or this afternoon to take some stock about some of those places in your life in which you need God's healing love. And maybe stand with someone from the scriptures to help you with that. Maybe that's Mary, maybe that's Joseph, maybe that's St. Francis, maybe that's your founder, but whoever that you need to help you along the way. May God today give you peace.